Wichita's plan. In Zombieland, a theory emerged claiming Wichita deliberately engineered a death scenario for herself and Little Rock at Pacific Playland. Reddit user OreoMai1 popularized this interpretation, suggesting the amusement park trip was actually a disguised plan for both sisters to die together. Throughout the film, Wichita insists on reaching Pacific Playland specifically because Little Rock never experienced a normal childhood, framing the destination as one final gift of innocence in a world overrun by the infected. Once they arrive, Wichita activates every ride and light in the entire park, flooding the facility with power and creating a beacon that draws an enormous horde with no apparent escape route prepared. Supporters of this theory point to a lingering, melancholic look Wichita gives her sister after throwing the breakers, interpreted as a farewell moment before she seems to snap back to reality only when zombies begin pouring in. However, the film itself treats this decision as reckless optimism rather than intentional self-destruction. Tallahassee and Columbus arrive to mount a rescue. The group survives, and production materials consistently frame Pacific Playland as an emotionally cathartic finale for the found family dynamic, rather than a coded plan to end her life. This theory demonstrates how audiences can project darker motivations onto characters making impulsive, thematic choices in already bleak circumstances, transforming what the film presents as misguided hope into something far more tragic. Evolved Rage. 28 weeks later inspired a theory that Dawn Harris becomes an entirely new, more intelligent variant of the Rage virus after infection. In the film, Dawn survives the initial outbreak, but later contracts the virus when he kisses his wife Alice, who is established as an asymptomatic carrier harboring the infection without showing typical symptoms beyond bloodshot eyes. Redditor PrinceRaven94 proposed that Dawn's infection through a carrier produces a strain with retained cognitive function and heightened intelligence compared to standard infected individuals. The theory argues Dawn exhibits atypical behavior such as hiding, navigating complex environments with apparent strategy, and seemingly recognizing his son before attacking. Official franchise materials consistently define the infected as driven by mindless, animalistic, uncontrollable rage, with higher brain functions almost entirely suppressed. Dawn's on-screen behavior shows him brutally killing Alice during their reunion and rampaging through the repatriation zone with pure aggression rather than calculated thought. Later commentary about the series focuses on asymptomatic carriers and virus transmission patterns without ever endorsing the concept of evolved, semi-intelligent strains created through Dawn's specific infection route. This theory reflects how viewers search for gradations of consciousness, even in creatures explicitly defined as mindless, interpreting a few ambiguous reaction shots as evidence for an entire alternative virology that contradicts the franchise's established rules. Secret infection. A comprehensive Resident Evil theory claims most main protagonists secretly carry the T-virus, explaining their superhuman durability across multiple games. This widely shared Reddit theory argues that heroes like Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Leon Kennedy, Claire Redfield, and Rebecca Chambers were all successfully infected during early incidents, but stabilized rather than turning. Theorists note these characters endure attacks, contaminated environments, and direct exposure that should prove fatal, yet they exhibit remarkable strength, healing, and slowed aging throughout sequels spanning decades. Canon explicitly confirms Jill's infection by a Nemesis-derived T-virus strain in Resident Evil 3, followed by her cure using an Umbrella vaccine. And in Resident Evil 5, her T-virus antibodies made her a compatible test subject for the Ouroboros virus. Official lore describes other leads as highly trained survivors, occasionally government agents, but never as confirmed virus carriers. Leon is canonically infected by the Las Plagas parasite in Resident Evil 4, but undergoes a medical procedure to remove it late in the game, with no suggestion of retained parasite abilities afterward. Franchise discussions around protagonist immunity list multiple competing explanations, including partial natural resistance, vaccine exposure, or simple narrative convention, rather than a single hidden infection answer. Capcom has never declared that playable characters function as walking, stabilized bioweapons, and recent materials still treat them as exceptionally trained, but fundamentally human survivors. This theory flips the franchise's core premise by transforming heroes into exactly what they fight, using power-scaling logic and lore gaps to rationalize game mechanics that let protagonists survive impossible odds. Valium Hallucination. 28 days later spawned a bleak theory, suggesting everything after Jim takes Valium in a roadside diner is merely merely his dying hallucination. Discussed extensively on Reddit and in analysis videos, this interpretation claims the film's final act, including Frank's death, the military compound, and the cottage ending with rescue, exists only in Jim's mind as he succumbs. Supporters point to an earlier fake-out dream, where Jim awakens from a nightmare after receiving sleeping pills, arguing this establishes structural precedent for another, longer hallucination sequence. They note Jim's malnourished, exhausted condition makes him vulnerable to delirium, and highlight the surreal quality of the finale with its giant "Hello" banner and sudden rescue plane. Canonically, 28 Days Later has three main alternate endings: the theatrical cut where Jim survives with Selena and Hannah, a hospital death scene, and a radical alternative with different tone. Director Danny Boyle and writer Alex Garland discussed these alternate versions extensively, emphasizing they were testing tonal options rather than implying the theatrical ending as a dream. The rage virus nature and worldwide quarantine elements are treated as genuine throughout the franchise, continuing into 28 weeks later and 28 years later, which implicitly assumes the first film's events actually occurred. Later commentary treats Jim as surviving the original film's events, aligning with the optimistic theatrical resolution. This represents a textbook example of horror audiences retrofitting a downer twist onto a deliberately ambiguous but ultimately hopeful ending, mistaking formal tricks like mirrored opening and closing shots for secret canon, even when creators and sequels quietly contradict that reading. Radio solution. One Night of the Living Dead theory insists Ben would have survived if he had maintained access to the upstairs radio, instead of retreating to the cellar. Throughout the film, Ben argues for staying upstairs to monitor the radio, television, and windows, while Harry Cooper pushes for everyone to barricade themselves in the basement. After the house is overrun, Ben retreats to the cellar alone, surviving the night but losing access to live news broadcasts that might have provided crucial information. Fans theorize that off-screen rescue broadcasts likely instructed survivors on how to safely approach militia groups at dawn, perhaps advising them to stay low, announce themselves loudly, or avoid sudden movements that could be mistaken for ghoul behavior. In the actual ending, Ben cautiously emerges at daybreak and is immediately shot in the head by an armed posse who mistake him for a ghoul. His body later burned alongside other corpses. Director George Romero later emphasized the ending was written primarily as tragic mistaken identity, with its racial commentary emerging more strongly through how audiences interpreted the scene in its historical context. This theory captures desperate viewer attempts to find a correct choice that could avert an obviously rigged tragic outcome, but it misses Romero's point. In systemic chaos and prejudice, sometimes no winning move exists, regardless of radio access or preparation. Necronomicon Multiverse. The Evil Dead franchise inspired a popular theory claiming every film, remake, and television series occur in separate universes connected through different copies of the Necronomicon. Reddit discussions and fan essays argue that continuity inconsistencies between The Evil Dead 2, Army of Darkness, the 2013 remakes, and Ash vs. Evil Dead are best explained by treating each as its own universe, spawned by distinct Necronomicon copies. Evidence includes Evil Dead 2's opening recap that restages events with only Ash and Linda, completely ignoring the other cabin friends from the original film, plus altered transitions into Army of Darkness. The Ash vs. Evil Dead series references cabin events while treating details differently again, further complicating any straightforward linear timeline. Behind the scenes, Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi repeatedly explained that Evil Dead 2's odd recap exists because they did not own rights to footage from the original film, forcing them to reshoot a compressed version with necessary changes. Campbell described Evil Dead 2 as a requel, part recap and part sequel, caused by rights and budget constraints rather than intentional multiverse design. Fan theories about three Necronomicons and parallel timelines have become a beloved way to reconcile everything, but these represent post hoc frameworks rather than explicit canon. This demonstrates how production constraints, including rights issues, reshoots, and shifting tones, can inspire fans to construct elaborate multiverse theories that retroactively rationalize messy continuity born from real-world filmmaking compromises. By the way, if you're enjoying this type of content, I post videos like this all the time. A subscription would really help me out. Madison's Mutation. Zombieland, Double Tap, sparked speculation that Madison represents a new zombie variant rather than simply an airheaded survivor. In the film, Madison claims she survived by living inside a pinkberry freezer to avoid zombies, establishing her connection to extreme cold. Midway through the story, she develops symptoms resembling zombification, including retching, rashes, and altered behavior, leading Columbus to believe she has turned turned and fire a warning shot past her head to drive her away. A Reddit theory suggests she is an evolved zombie whose condition is temporarily stabilized by cold temperatures, tying into her freezer backstory, and a later reference to a freezer on wheels ice cream truck. Canon makes the twist explicit when Madison reappears alive and well, explaining she has a severe nut allergy, and that her reaction to trail mix mimicked zombie symptoms perfectly. The scene directly shows her thanking Columbus for shooting above her head rather than at her, confirming the misunderstanding on screen and leaving no narrative space for secret infection. This rare case shows the movie itself firmly debunking the fan theory, yet speculation persists because viewers enjoy the absurd image of Madison as a frozen, half-functioning undead. It reminds us that some theories survive purely on vibes and creative interpretation rather than actual evidence. Dead sequel. An ambitious theory positions Warm Bodies as a far-future sequel to George Romero's Land of the Dead. A Reddit theory, popularized through Ranker, argues Warm Bodies takes place decades after Romero's original Dead trilogy, continuing the arc of increasingly intelligent zombies established across Dawn, Day, and Land of the Dead. In Romero's films, zombies gradually retain more memory and tool use, with mall zombies wandering with shopping carts in Dawn, Bub recognizing people and firing guns in Day, and Big Daddy leading organized attacks while solving practical problems in Land. Warm Bodies features zombies like R&M who communicate through grunts, exhibit rudimentary social bonds, and experience vivid flashback memories when consuming brains, which theory supporters view as the logical endpoint of Romero's evolving undead. The theory also connects Bonies, the skeletal feral zombies, to the most decayed, mindless ghouls seen throughout the Dead series, suggesting the zombification cause never fully explained in Romero canon could be shared across both properties. Director Jonathan Levine consistently described Warm Bodies as a genre-bending romantic zombie comedy inspired by Romeo and Juliet and Night of the Living Dead, not as a secret continuation of Romero's continuity. The film's rights and branding exist entirely separate from the Living Dead franchise, with no official material marketing it as part of that universe. This represents one of the more imaginative cross-franchise mashups born from thematic parallels rather than any real connection, demonstrating how fans build mega-universes across unrelated properties whenever motifs like zombies regaining humanity happen to align. Vehicular Tragedy. A dark Shaun of the Dead theory claims Shaun and Ed accidentally kill a living human with their car before the victim reanimates as a zombie. Early in the film, Shaun and Ed drive Pete's car to rescue Liz and slam into a staggering figure in the road, who flips dramatically over the vehicle. They reverse to check on the body, see it rise with cloudy eyes, and Shaun sighs in relief, assuming the person was already a zombie when impact occurred. Fan theory argues the man was actually a still-living, panicked human, whose death from the car impact preceded his reanimation moments later by the zombie pathogen, meaning Shaun and Ed inadvertently committed vehicular manslaughter. Supporters note timing of a radio broadcast warning that bodies of the recently deceased are returning to life, and the film's portrayal of rapid post-mortem turning. However, the man's posture and movement before impact, with arms outstretched and shambling gait, already resemble other zombies populating the street, suggesting infection preceded Shaun's car collision. Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg have not endorsed the manslaughter reading in commentaries, with the scene played as a gag about character obliviousness rather than hidden moral indictment. This theory shows how fans retroactively inject grim realism into comedy, reinterpreting a slapstick beat as tragic moral mistake, while raising broader questions about certainty during chaotic outbreaks, when determining who remains human versus who has already turned. Class warfare. Pride and Prejudice in Zombies inspired a theory reading its undead hordes as metaphor for English working class rising against aristocratic elites. A Reddit fan essay argues that while Jane Austen's original Pride and Prejudice largely ignores servants and laborers, Pride and Prejudice in Zombies fills the world with lower-class zombies, including servants, orphans, and laborers who menace landed gentry like the Bennets and Lady Catherine. The film's prologue suggests the plague may have originated from Europe or the colonies, which the theory links to revolutionary ideas inspiring lower classes during the French and American revolutions spreading to England. Some zombies attempt forming their own society using religious rhetoric, paralleling how working-class Methodist movements during the Industrial Revolution used faith to argue for equality and rights against entrenched power structures. Literary scholars and reviewers note both the parody novel and film use zombies to explore class, gender, and economic anxiety, but they stop short of declaring the undead a precise one-to-one metaphor for workers. Critical work typically frames consumerism itself and systemic capitalist conditioning as the villain, rather than identifying specific class antagonism. This entry illustrates how zombies zombie stories become interpretive tests for social commentary, with even tongue-in-cheek mashups sparking serious debates about capitalism, class struggle, and identifying who the real hordes threatening society actually represent. Lost canon. Some fans insist Anna and the Apocalypse secretly takes place within George Romero's original zombie canon. A popular Reddit theory suggests the film's zombies represent a Romero-style outbreak with shambling movement, slow pace, supernatural curse rather than viral cause, and flashes of memory, including lingering around familiar locations. The theory highlights that the outbreak erupts almost overnight, and zombies rarely show tactical intelligence associated with fast infection zombies from franchises like World War Z. Arguments lean heavily on homage elements, with Anna using classic siege setups, including a school as stronghold, musical numbers over shambling hordes, and stylistic nods to Romero's Dead films throughout its runtime. Official synopses and behind-the-scenes features frame Anna and the Apocalypse as its own Christmas zombie musical, with no licensed connection to Living Dead rights or established continuity. The film exists as a standalone property celebrating the genre rather than secretly expanding existing universes. This entry shows how tonal and visual homages often get promoted into full shared universe claims by fans eager to connect everything, representing less about being factually correct and more about celebrating Romero's massive influence on subsequent zombie media across decades. Hidden immunity. A World War Z theory suggests protagonist Jerry Lane already carries a deadly disease, explaining why zombies repeatedly ignore him. In the film, Jerry observes zombies bypassing individuals who appear sick, injured, or frail, most notably an elderly man and malnourished boy in Jerusalem, leading him to hypothesize the pathogen avoids hosts incapable of effective spread. Fan theory escalates this concept, arguing a young boy whose parents die in Newark must be terminally ill and subsequently infects Jerry with some undiagnosed disease, explaining Jerry's improbable survival through multiple swarms. The theory cites scenes where Jerry is grabbed or knocked down but never bitten in locations like South Korea or during bicycle escape, suggesting zombies collide with him incidentally while pursuing healthier prey. Canon makes clear Jerry deduces the camouflage principle only after compiling multiple observations across locations, then deliberately injects himself with a known curable pathogen at the World Health Organization lab to test his hypothesis. The film shows Jerry waking in the Cardiff facility after routine medical treatment, with no indication he carried terminal illness prior to his self-infection experiment. Director Mark Forster and production interviews describe zombie selectivity as evolved, efficient targeting behavior of the virus, rather than evidence the protagonist happened to be pre-infected throughout his journey. This theory reimagines the story as ironic twist, where the hero possessed safety all along, but it clashes with the movie's structure, building tension around Jerry discovering, then choosing to risk himself with experimental infection, rather than operating under a secret safety net audiences never learn about. If you found this valuable, subscribe so you never miss new content. Appreciate you watching.